welcome to, or welcome back to my channel. Why do I always stumble over that? Welcome back to my channel, me, my dog and books. I'm Johanna. And today's video, do you know, well, firstly I'll tell you what today's video is, so you know whether you keep watching or not. I am going to share some of the books that my friends have said they wish they could read again for the first time. Lucy is clip-clopping around, in case you can wonder. I don't know where, oh, she's behind, Patty's over there. Don't let me forget to show you. Anyway, I asked a question on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, or a week or so ago, which was, which book do you wish you could read for the first time? And loads of my followers came back with some suggestions, so I thought, why not make that a video and share some of the suggestions people have about the books that they wish they could read for the first time. And I'm not going to lie, I was starting to wonder, like, what, I've got a pen because I've got notes, I've come prepared. I was like, what will I do this week's sort of midweek vlog about video? And I couldn't quite decide, so this was one that popped into my head just at the weekend. And then I thought, do you know what, friends? Put in the comments any video suggestions you'd like me to share. One that I did have was sharing some of the Scottish books and authors that you'd recommended on some of my favourite Scottish books video. There's quite a few mentioned there that I haven't included, so I was thinking I could do another video about that. Another video I was thinking about was cosy mysteries with little to no romance, because that's a kind of cosy mystery genre which is a bit niche that I'm interested in. And when I asked for recommendations, some of you guys came back, and I say guys in a non-gender specific way, but you folks came back with quite a few good suggestions which I thought might make a nice video. And yeah, so I am open to the weekend, like obviously I've got the weekend reading vlogs that happen, always open to suggestions around that if you'd like to see less of that. But today I thought I'll take all of these recommendations and share them. When I was making a note, so I've got 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15 to share with you. That's quite good, isn't it? It's a mix of historical fiction, horror thriller, contemporary fiction, contemporary literary fiction, classics, fantasy, even though I'm not a big fantasy reader, and some thrillers, so quite a mix of genres. So I feel that you will at least get 1 or 2 book recommendations here that you might be interested in picking up and reading for the first time, because many people mentioned that these were books that they would love to read for the first time. So in no particular order, I'm just going through these. Some of them I've read, so I'll be able to co-sign or not. Others I haven't, and so I'll give you a bit of blurb of what it's about. And then, because I'm not a big fantasy reader, but there are a couple of fantasy ones in here, one of which I actually enjoyed. So it's not black and white when it comes to fantasy for me. So I come prepared with my notes, bear with, because I wanted to do a good job, you know, put a lot of work into, put a lot of research into checking that these books would, oh, I'm sitting at my table, excuse me, I've actually got water today, not a cup of tea. Because I'm particularly hot, I say that wearing a sweater with something underneath it. Anyway, let's get started. Now, I do apologise because I can't remember who recommended what, but I will link the post that I put on Instagram asking which book do you wish you'd read for the first time. So I've got most of them, maybe about 80% of them I've put in. The first one was Caraval by Tiffany. I didn't write her name down. Well, this is starting off well, isn't it? Anyway, this is sort of YA fantasy. And apparently, so I've not read this, but I do have lots of friends, both on here and on Instagram, who have read and loved this. And they are a mix of fantasy readers and not big fantasy readers. So which tells me this is quite an accessible book. So from what I know, there's this spectacle or event called Caraval that happens once a year, and it's some sort of game or competition where the audience or those who are attending the event can participate. And then I think there's two sisters who have what is deemed this unbreakable bond, and I think they're in quite a tumultuous family situation. I think they've got an evil dad, and I believe there's romance involved. On reading it, it was kind of giving me Hunger Game vibes from the synopsis, but don't take that on any sort of level because I've not read this book. I believe it's a game of love, heartbreak and magic. And to be fair, for anyone that likes this genre, like is an avid fan, and I don't say I don't like it, it's just not a genre I veer towards. I've mostly heard great reviews. The cover looks stunning. I think it's a trilogy, but someone in the comments correct me on that. There is definitely more than one book. And the next is a book that I have read, and I 100% co-sign that if it is a great book to read for the first time. Like, it's one of those books that have jaw-dropping plot twists. It's Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I can't remember if this came before or after Gone Girl, but yeah, it's up there with Gone Girl for me. So you follow, by the way, if you can hear other voices, it's because the OH is in his meeting, is in his office, sorry, in a meeting, and he's on a very loud Zoom call. Anyway, I need to soundproof walls. So in Sharp Objects, you follow, I think the main character, I wrote it down, she's a reporter called Camille. So she has just came out of a very short stay on a psych ward, and she was returning to her small hometown where she is investigating the unsolved murder of a young girl and a recent disappearance and how they might be connected. Let's just say this is full of what I expected from Gillian Flynn, which was twisty psychological thriller with plot twists you just don't see coming. I adored this book. Again, is another fantasy, which actually I did really enjoy. It's The Hobbit by... Oh, I was about to say the wrong J. JRR Tolkien. Despite not being a Lord of the Rings fan personally, and I have many friends who are, so I'm not dissing it, it's just not, it's a genre my brain cannot compute because there's so much world building and stuff. Despite that, I would highly recommend The Hobbit. This is a book where you can read it, well, you could probably read it, I have read it as a standalone. I tried to then read the first book in the Lord of the Rings and I couldn't get out of, I've tried 3 times. I may in the future try again. But The Hobbit is where you're introduced to the sort of unreluctant hero that is Bilbo Baggins, and you meet Gandalf and Gollum and Middle-earth. So it's a really good introduction to that world. And I loved it. It's not my usual go-to book, but I absolutely loved it, and I can see why it is the kind of book. It's so unique, and it's entering into a brand new world, which if you do really enjoy, you could be absorbed into the books that follow. The next is a book that I'd never heard of, and apologies, I can't remember who recommended this one, but I'm definitely going to be adding it to my TBR. It's called 5 Smooth Stones by Anne Fairbairn. I think it's a historical fiction. Now, I don't know if this is set or... No, I think it was written in like the mid-60s. So you follow a main character who is... I can't remember their name, but it's a black man who's just been born into poverty in the Depression era of New Orleans. But he manages to, you know, climb the ladder of success despite his beginnings. However, he then chooses to sacrifice everything to lead his people in the civil rights movement. This, for me, sounds like such a powerful read. I don't know anything about the author or the beginnings of the story, but that synopsis sounds amazing, so thanks for that recommendation. I can see why, as a kind of story arc, certainly, that would be such an intriguing story. I didn't really say that, did I? I was feeling quite passionate, it just didn't come out. But yeah, thanks to whoever recommended that, because I'm adding that to my wish list. Next up, and I never put this one, I actually recommended The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward before I jump into this one. Thought I'd better mention that actually. That was the one that I picked. I mean, there's many that I would pick, but I picked this one. It's psychological horror thriller, and I would say go in knowing nothing and know that you'll, for 3/4 of it, pretty much be confused and not know what's going on, but not in the way I felt about her latest one. That was just so confusing that I didn't enjoy. This one, it's one of my best books of the year it came out. This one was one of my friends, Zoe, who actually recommended this book to me originally, and was the reason I read it, and also the reason it was one of my favourite books of 2023. Is On the Savage Side by Tiffany McDaniel. And if you're not new to my channel, you'll have heard me talk about this book a lot. If you are new to my channel, it was my favourite book of 2023. So the premise, and I try not to, I've kind of more taken it from the synopsis as opposed to my memory because I don't want to spoil too much. So the premise is, there's 6 mothers, daughters and sisters who have gone missing. And the first is found floating dead in the river. And it kicks off the unveiling of dark secrets and truth in a small town in Ohio. This story is actually inspired by Unsolved Murders of the Chillicothe 6, which is a story I wasn't aware of in Appalachia. So that's all I would say going in. It's very much about 2 sisters, Daphne and I can't remember. I should remember. It's like one of my favourite books. Anyway, you follow 2 sisters during all of this. They've got a really strong bond. Anyway, that's all I would say about going into it. Cosine. I wish I could read this for the first time again. Next one's a classic. It is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Fun fact, Louisa is the name of my little sister. I don't think she was named after that author. I don't think so. My mum's not a massive reader. I have asked her before and she can't remember. Anyway, that's a side note. Who doesn't know about the March sisters? Have you got a favourite? I think Jo was mine. But do you know, it's been a long time since I've read it, so I do think it's one I'll have to reread. You follow a group of sisters, the March sisters, who are utterly devoted to each other but also struggling during the Civil War. They're set in New England, and the story is set during the Civil War. I believe it's based on the author's early life. I think that's kind of like a known fact. Anyway, many a movie adaptation, many a beautiful book edition, and actually I'm not even sure I own that yet. It's one I would like to own. By the way, if you've read any of these books, do let me know in the comments, and please do let me know of books that you wish you could read for the first time, because this could spin off another video. Now, I'm going to share this one because I know so many people that love it. I, however, am not one of them, and it's more because I do not enjoy, personally, in my own personal opinion, this author's writing style. That is not to say I know many people that do, and so I'm definitely sharing it. And I can understand why you would maybe want to read this again for the first time. It is Normal People by Salley Rooney. I've tried that one and I've tried a few others, and I actually think it's the author's writing style I really struggle with. In Normal People you follow a couple, Connell and Marianne. They're not actually a couple, but you follow them through school and college, and they're kind of always interconnected relationship, as interconnected or disconnected that it is. They're not actually a couple in the sense. That's the complexity of the story you follow, which is what is basically a very complicated and frustrating relationship between these two. And I think that's what I struggled with. I was just like, there was so much where I wanted to shake these characters and I was like, just communicate. But I think I'm just of in a generation where that kind of relationship, like, would drive me insane. The story does, however, explore class, the excitement of first love, and the complicated or the complexities of family and friendship relationship. Salley Rooney has a very unique writing style, which I think you either love or hate, in my opinion. But it is a book that a couple of you mentioned you wish you could read for the first time. Another one, and is one I read years ago, and I think it may have been for book group, but I can't remember. It's definitely a book that you could read for book group and have a really good discussion about. It is My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult. I think it was the first Jodi Picoult book I read. It was probably one of her first that was published. Anyway, Jodi Picoult does tend to take on real life sort of scenarios and bring that into a book. Like, she's known for doing quite a lot of research around her books, and there's always like a moral question, I've found today anyway, in her stories. FYI, I highly recommend Mad Honey, which was one of her most recent ones. Don't read too much about the blurb, but there's 2 authors that write this story, and even if you're not a massive Jodi Picoult fan, I dare you to read it. And then that was a great book. Anyway, by the by, My Sister's Keeper. It takes on that question of how far would you go to save the life of your own child to the detriment of another, and it explores that question of what it takes to make a good parent, a good sister, a good person. So there's a whole moral question around all of that, which in this story makes for very good reading. I do actually really like, and there's quite a lot of Jodi Picoult books I've really enjoyed over the years, and this was one of the very first, so I can imagine why reading that for the first time would be a very different experience. I didn't put this suggestion down either, but there's obviously a fellow Stephen King fan in my friend group, and that person, actually, I don't know if this was one I would have picked out of all the King books personally, but then I can see why. It's The Stand, which is horror. It's a horror book of Stephen King's, because he doesn't always just write horror, and it's a book I'm actually going to read the kind of synopsis. Is very short, so bear with, because I think this does the best way of describing what it's about. I have read it a couple of years ago, was maybe the last time I read it. So it says, first came the days of the plague. Then came the dreams, dark dreams that warned of the coming of the dark man, the apostate, I can never say that word, apostate of death. I've ruined this already. Apocalypse looms. Actually could have just given you one synopsis, because I ruined the reading of that. Fundamentally, there's a plague, there's dreams that kick off from this, there's dreams of a dark man, and this dark man is the epitome, or I don't know how to describe apostate, that I can't say, of death, and that starts to build in the world. Anyway, that's the premise. It is a chunk of a book. The last time I read it, I did an audio, and actually really recommend the audiobook. But if you love big books and horror, there's one to get started on. But I would recommend it in audio if you do have the ability to listen to audiobooks. What would be the first Stephen King one I would recommend? That's a good question. I would maybe say to read for the first time would either be 11/22/63 or The Shining. One a thriller, one a horror, so very different genres. Anyway, the next one I co-sign also, and there was actually a couple of people recommended this book. However, this book is not for everyone. It's A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. I read this when it first came out years ago, and it emotionally destroyed me, and it is a book that will emotionally destroy you. It is hundreds of pages of utter trauma, beautifully written. It's not for the faint-hearted, because it pretty much has every possible content warning you can think of in it. But that aside, to read it for the first time again and have those emotions and that connection with the 4 main characters would be stunning. So let me tell you what it's about. Firstly, it's queer literary fiction, and you follow 4 classmates who move to New York. So they're broke, a bit adrift, but they're full of friendship and ambition. And then you start to follow them over the decade, and that is when their relationships start to deepen and darken, and you have abuse and addiction and full-on trauma. That's all I'm going to say. But you will come out, if this is your kind of genre and you like those kind of emotionally destructive books, you'll want to buy the t-shirt with 4 characters' names on it. That's the vibe. You end up going like, oh my god, who's read this book? We need to talk. So one of those ones. But like I said, it's a chunk of a book, so you need to be emotionally prepared to read that. I am never going to be emotionally prepared to see the theatre production. Then, one of you lovely friends mentioned The Centre by Ayesha, Manazir, Siddiqi, and weirdly, before this was mentioned, I can't remember who was talking about it on BookTube, but I'd seen a review of it and I thought, ooh, that sounds good, and I've added it to my wish list. So I'm glad to see someone say, I wish this was a book I could read for the first time again. It's deemed horror thriller, and it's apparently a darkly comedic story that follows an adrift Pakistani translator who is in London, and they go to a language school where they guarantee complete fluency in a language in no less than 10 days. But apparently that comes at a secret and sinister cost. That's all I know. That's all I want to know. But also the cover. So, yeah, I don't think I'll be, I've already added it to my wish list. The next one I co-signed to is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was my first ever Taylor Jenkins Reid, and it got me into Taylor Jenkins Reid's books. Other ones I would highly recommend of hers are Carrie Soto Is Back, Malibu Rising. I think those are the main other like chunky ones. I have read 1 or 2 others, but The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is still up there for me. It's a 5-star read. So it's historical fiction, and you follow an aging, reclusive Hollywood movie icon, Evelyn Hugo, who decides that it's finally time for her to tell the story of her glamorous and scandalous lifestyle. But she chooses a reporter, I think called Monique. Unknown person, unknown reporter, so like not a known sort of Hollywood journalist or anything like that, a complete unknown. And even Monique herself wonders why her and why now. That's all you need to know going in. Don't read any more about the synopsis, but know that this is a story that hooked me from the very beginning until the very last sentence. And I kind of do wish I could read that again for the first time, because there's things that happen in that and you're like, oh, no. So, historical fiction, but more than that. Then I jumped to another horror, which I actually have read, and I can see why. It's actually quite a short book. It's I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, which is, yes, the book that the movie with, is it Will Smith? Was in. So you follow Robert, who is the last living man on planet Earth, because every other person is pretty much a vampire. So he spends his day hunting the undead, and he spends the night barricaded in his home praying for dawn. There are many aspects of this novella that are quite different to the movie, including the ending, and that is all I'm going to say. But if you love the movie, highly recommend reading the book, and if you've not seen the movie but you love horror and that premise, read it. For now, I've only got 2 more left to tell you about. One I've read, another one I'd never heard of. So let's start with the one I'd never heard of. It's The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. Now, I have read one Lisa C before and really enjoyed it. It was called, and I had to write it down because I couldn't remember, Snowflower and Secret Fan. So I did really enjoy that one. I wouldn't say it was one that I think I wish I'd read for the first time again, but clearly this one is from one of my lovely friends. It's historical fiction, and it's set in the Korean island of Jeju. which I'd never heard of before, not surprisingly because my geography is shocking. And you follow two main characters, Meja and Youngsuk, and they are two women from very different backgrounds. They begin working in the sea in the village's all-female diving collective. And over the years, so you kind of follow their relationship. Over the years, they follow them through Japanese colonialism, World War II, the Korean War, the era of cell phones, so you follow lots of decades. And these two characters like develop the closest of bonds, but according to the synopsis, their differences are difficult to ignore. This sounds absolutely fascinating. I'd never heard of an all-female diving collective. I think it's based on historical facts, but obviously fictionalised or inspired by. I do really enjoy Lisa C's writing, so I'm adding that to my wish list. Let me know if anyone else has heard of this one before, because I love the premise. I also now desperately want to know why it would be a good one to read for the first time. It's what I'm thinking about all these books that I haven't read before. And then last but not least, it's a classic, and I've read it and I do enjoy it. I do love it. I love the film adaptation, the old one. And I can, for anyone that's read it, you probably know why, but if not, this is a good book to read for the first time, going in not knowing much than what I'm about to tell you. It's Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So this story revolves around a young protagonist who marries a wealthy widower, Maxim de Winter. You'll probably recognise some of these names actually, even if you've not read the book, because the characters are quite well known. When they get married, they move to Maxim de Winter's very grand, stately, grand estately home called Manderley. But in this home, his new wife, the new Mrs. de Winter, feels very overshadowed by his first wife, Rebecca. Rebecca's influence is felt very strongly in the house, especially by the sinister housekeeper, Mrs. Danvers. But this is when the new Mrs. de Winter starts to uncover the truths about the life and death of Rebecca. And that's all you need to know. It's very Hitchcockian in its vibes if you were to compare it to a kind of mystery, gothic mystery. I loved this book, still do. It's one I could intermittently would reread, but it is one that you kind of wish you could reread. You can't reread for the first time, but you wish you could read it for the first time, not knowing what happens and things like that. So there's a whole mix of classics, horror, thriller, historical fiction, contemporary fiction, there's a fantasy, there is a whole mix in there. So I would love to know, firstly, what books do you wish you could read for the first time? And secondly, have you read any of these books and agree or disagree? And also, if you've gone this far in watching my kinda on a whim midweek video, please give me a wavy hand emoji. And I would also love any recommendations from you about future videos you'd like to see, because I'd like to make stuff that you'd be interested in watching. Hopefully this was one of it, and if not, they get better, I promise. But thank you so much for watching, for liking, and if you don't already and like these videos and would like to see more, please do subscribe. And until next time, probably a weekend reading vlog, see you soon.